I still remember the exact moment my father decided to erase me. It was a Thursday night, just after 7, at the long mahogany dining table in his suburban Chicago mansion. The kind of table that could seat 12 people, but somehow always made me feel like there wasn't a place for me at all. Everyone was there. My stepmother, Diane, perfectly put together like she was hosting a charity gala instead of a family dinner. My older brother, Ethan, sitting at my father's right hand, already laughing at something I hadn't heard. Even 2 men I didn't recognize, men in tailored suits who didn't belong to our family but clearly belonged to something important, sat quietly near the end of the table. I knew something was off the moment I walked in. The conversation didn't stop completely. It just shifted. Softer. Controlled. Like I had interrupted something I wasn't supposed to hear. And then, halfway through dinner, after a toast that somehow praised everyone except me, my father leaned back in his chair, looked straight at me, and said it. Cold. Measured. Almost bored. "You were a mistake." No one gasped. No one defended me. And in that moment, I realized this dinner wasn't just about humiliation. It was about something much bigger. I almost didn't come that night. I sat in my car outside the gates for a full minute before driving in, staring at the iron bars like they were a warning instead of an entrance. Something in my chest had tightened the second I read the invitation earlier that week. Not fear exactly. Just instinct. But I went anyway. I always did. The driveway was lined with cars that didn't belong to family. Sleek black sedans. Polished and unfamiliar. That should have been my first clue. This wasn't just dinner. When I stepped out, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The house looked the same. Perfect. Expensive. Untouched by time, but something about it felt staged. Like a set waiting for a scene to play out. Before I could reach the door, it opened. One of the house staff stood there, already waiting. "They've been expecting you," she said quietly. Her eyes flickered up to mine for just a second. Long enough for me to notice something I hadn't seen before. Not indifference. Not even discomfort. Warning. Inside. The dining room lights were already dimmed to that soft, golden glow my stepmother loved. Everyone was seated except for me. Of course. "Vanessa," Diane said, her smile perfectly polite and completely empty. "You made it. We weren't sure you would—" I nodded, forcing something that almost passed for a smile. There was no place set for me at first. Not until one of the staff quickly adjusted the arrangement, sliding a plate to the far end of the table. The opposite end from my father. The opposite end from Ethan. Exactly where I belonged. As I sat down, I noticed the folders, neatly stacked beside my father's hand. Dark covers. Clean edges. Each one labeled. I couldn't read them from where I was. But I didn't need to. This wasn't dinner. This was business. Conversation moved around me like I wasn't there. Ethan talked about expansion plans. One of the men asked questions about projections. Diane chimed in with careful interest. I listened. I always listened. Because no one ever thought I mattered enough to notice. At one point, one of the men leaned slightly toward my father and murmured something under his breath. My father nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then glanced down the table. At me. It didn't feel like acknowledgement. It felt like evaluation. Then came the toast. My father stood, glass in hand, the room immediately quieting for him in a way it never had for anyone else. "To the future of this family," he said. His eyes shifted to Ethan. "To the ones who are ready to carry it forward." Ethan lifted his glass. Confident, comfortable. Like this moment had always belonged to him. I waited. Not because I expected anything. Just habit, but my name never came. The silence after the toast lingered just a little too long. Just enough to feel intentional. Then my father set his glass down and leaned back in his chair, his attention finally settling on me like I had just become relevant. "I suppose we should address the situation," he said. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't ask what he meant. I think part of me already knew. And then he said it. You were a mistake. The words landed heavier this time. Not because they were new, but because of where we were, who was watching. I felt it in my body before I felt it in my mind. The slight ringing in my ears, the tightening in my throat, the way my hands went still in my lap. Across the table, Diane looked down at her plate. Ethan didn't look at me at all. One of the men shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The other took a sip of his drink like nothing had happened. A glass clinked softly somewhere to my left. No one spoke. I could have said something. I could have stood up, walked out, fought back. But I didn't. Because in that moment, something changed. This wasn't anger. This wasn't even cruelty. This was deliberate, carefully placed, like a line in a script everyone else had already read. I stayed where I was, my voice steady when I finally spoke. Is that what this is about? My father didn't answer right away. He just watched me, like he was waiting to see how I would react. Like this was a test, and I suddenly understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't the first time he had said those words, but it was the first time he wanted witnesses. My eyes drifted back to the folders near his hand. One of them had my name on it. I was sure of it now. This dinner wasn't about the past. It was about what they were about to do next. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood, ignoring the weight of their eyes on me. I need some air, I said. No one stopped me. Of course they didn't. Out in the hallway, the house felt quieter, colder. I barely made it a few steps before I heard soft footsteps behind me. Miss Cole. I turned. It was the same staff member who had opened the door earlier. Up close. I could see the tension in her face. You shouldn't have come tonight, she whispered. My chest tightened again. Why? I asked. She hesitated, glancing back toward the dining room. Then, softer this time. They're planning something. A pause. And it involves you? I stood there for a second after she walked away, the silence pressing in around me. Then I looked back toward the dining room, toward the people who had spent my entire life making me feel like I didn't belong. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt alert, because whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't cry when I got into my car. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, replaying his voice in my head. Not the words themselves, I'd heard them before, but the way he said them. Calm, controlled, like it had been planned. You were a mistake. The house behind me glowed warm and perfect, like nothing had happened inside, like I hadn't just been erased in front of a room full of people. I should have been used to it by now, but something about tonight felt different. I started the engine, pulling away slowly, my eyes flicking once to the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought I saw headlights shift across the street. A black SUV, parked just far enough to blend into the shadows. Maybe it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. The drive back into the city was quiet. The streets were nearly empty, the kind of silence that usually calmed me. Tonight, it only made everything louder in my head. Why now? Why bring me back after all these years just to humiliate me again? And why in front of witnesses? That part didn't make sense. My father didn't do things without a reason. Everything with him was deliberate, strategic, which meant tonight wasn't about emotion. It was about positioning. I tightened my grip on the wheel, and then I saw it again in my mind. The folders on the table. One of them had my name on it. I was sure of it. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, the question had changed. This wasn't about why he said it. It was about why he needed me there to hear it. I barely noticed the cold as I stepped out of the car, my mind already somewhere else. By the time I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I wasn't thinking about what he had said anymore. I was thinking about everything that didn't add up. I set my keys down and leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for just a second, and then, like it always did, the past came rushing back. I was 10 the first time I understood I didn't belong. It was my birthday. The house had been full that day too. Family, friends, people my father wanted to impress. There had been decorations, A cake. Gifts stacked neatly on the table. Ethan sat beside me, already opening a watch. Expensive. Shiny. Too old for him. Really? But my father smiled like he'd just handed him the future. One day, all of this will be yours, he said, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I remember waiting. Not for a gift. Just something. A look. A word. Anything that said I mattered too. But when my father looked at me, it wasn't the same. It never was. I got a small box later. Something forgettable. Something safe. I thanked him anyway, because that's what I had learned to do. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, I wandered back into the hallway near the kitchen. That's when I heard Diane's voice. She shouldn't even be here. I froze. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. Not fully. But I understood enough to feel it. That quiet, sinking feeling that maybe she was right. By the time I turned 17, it wasn't quiet anymore. I had asked my father for help with college. Not even all of it. Just enough to make things possible. He didn't even hesitate. You figure things out on your own. That was all he said. No explanation. No apology. Just a line drawn where I had never been allowed to stand. A week later, I watched Ethan celebrate his acceptance into a private university. My father stood beside him again. Proud? Invested? Certain. Everything I wasn't. I signed my loan papers alone. And that should have been the moment I stopped trying. But I didn't. Because part of me still believed there had to be a reason. There always is. In my early 20s, I found my way back into the one place I thought might finally give me answers. The company, Cole Industries. I didn't walk in as family. I walked in as an employee, entry level. Nothing special. Just another name on a list. But I paid attention. I watched the way people treated Ethan. The way doors opened for him. The way decisions shifted around him. He wasn't just part of the company. He was its future. And me, I was tolerated. At best. But I saw things, small inconsistencies at first. Numbers that didn't quite align. Reports that were adjusted after hours. Nothing I could prove. Just enough to notice. One afternoon, I leaned over a desk to get a closer look at a set of financial summaries. The accountant sitting there stiffened immediately, sliding the papers just out of reach. "You don't need to worry about those," he said quickly. I didn't argue. I just nodded and remembered. A few days later, I stayed late, the office mostly empty, the silence stretching long enough for curiosity to feel like permission. That's when I found the email. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even in my department. But it was there. Open. Like someone had forgotten to close it. "She doesn't know. Keep it that way." I stared at those words longer than I should have. Trying to understand who she was. Trying to understand why it mattered. Before I could read more, the screen went black. Access denied. The next morning, I was called into Diane's office. "It's not a good fit for you," she said, her tone smooth. Final. I didn't ask questions. I already knew the answer wouldn't be the truth. As I walked out that day, I passed the same accountant. He didn't look at me. Not once. Back in my apartment now. Years later, I stood in the same quiet space I had built for myself. Everything in it was mine. Every inch earned. No one had handed me anything. And for the first time, I realized something that felt both simple and unsettling. They didn't just push me out. They made sure I never had a way back in. I crossed the room slowly and knelt down by the small storage box I kept tucked in the corner. I hadn't opened it in years. "Cole, documents," the label read. I lifted the lid, flipping through old papers, records, pieces of a life I had tried to leave behind. And then I saw it. My birth certificate. I stared at it longer than I expected. At the dates. At the details. At the parts I had never questioned before. Something didn't line up. It was small, subtle. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I sat back slowly, the paper still in my hands. And for the first time, the question shifted again. What if the problem was never me? What if it was the story they told about me? I looked down at the document, my heart steady now, my thoughts sharper than they had ever been. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just starting to make sense. I woke up the next morning feeling different. Not better, just clearer. The kind of clarity that comes when something finally shifts inside you. When the confusion that used to feel overwhelming starts to take shape into something sharper, more dangerous. I didn't check my phone right away. I just lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything from the night before. The dinner, the words, the silence, and then the details I hadn't fully understood at the time. The folders, the way the lawyer avoided eye contact, the way my father didn't look surprised when I stood up and left, like he already knew how it would end. That was the part I couldn't shake. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 3 missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. No voicemail, no messages, just attempts. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than necessary, a quiet tension settling into my chest. Then I set the phone down. If they wanted to reach me, they would, and if they didn't leave a message, maybe they didn't want a record of what they had to say. That thought lingered as I got up and moved through my morning slowly, almost methodically. Coffee, shower, clothes, routine, control. Because right now, that was the only thing I trusted. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing my coffee. Sharp. Unexpected. I froze for a second before setting the cup down and walking toward the door. No one ever showed up unannounced. Not for me. When I opened it, a courier stood there, holding a large envelope. "Vanessa Cole?" he asked. I nodded. He handed it over without another word, already turning to leave before I could ask anything. The envelope was heavier than I expected. Thick paper. Official. Not casual. Not personal. Legal. I closed the door slowly, staring down at it in my hands, something in my gut tightening again. This wasn't random. Nothing about this was random anymore. I carried it to the table and sat down, turning it over once before opening it. Inside was a single document. Formal, precise. The kind of language that says everything without explaining anything. An invitation to attend a private family legal proceeding. I read it twice before the words fully settled. The reading of my father's will. A strange, quiet laugh almost escaped me, but it died before it could reach the surface. Of course it would be this. I kept reading. The wording was careful, polished, but something about it felt off. Your presence is strongly advised. Not requested. Not welcomed. Advised. I leaned back slightly, the paper still in my hands. Why would they want me there? No, why would they need me there? That was the real question. Because if there was one thing my family had made clear my entire life, it was that I didn't belong in anything that mattered. So why now? I read the line again. Your presence is strongly advised. This wasn't a courtesy. It was a requirement. A slow realization began to settle in. They didn't invite me because they wanted me there. They invited me because they had to. I reached for my phone again and dialed the one person I trusted to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. Daniel picked up on the second ring. "Vanessa, I just got something," I said, skipping anything unnecessary. "A letter. From them." A pause on the other end. "What kind of letter?" "The will. They want me there for the reading." Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just silence. "Daniel," I said quietly, "tell me what this actually means." Another pause. Then, carefully, "It means you're involved in something they can't finalize without you." I stared down at the document again, my grip tightening slightly. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense," he said. "It just has to be legal." I exhaled slowly. "I don't understand why I'd be part of this." "You might not be part of it," he replied, You might be in the way of it. That landed heavier than I expected. What does that mean? It means, he said, his tone shifting slightly. If they've spent years keeping you out, and suddenly they're pulling you in, it's not for your benefit. I didn't respond right away, because deep down, I already knew that. I'm sending you a picture of the letter, I said. Do it, he replied. And Vanessa, I paused. Be careful what you sign when you get there. I ended the call a few seconds later, my mind already moving faster than before. This wasn't just a reading. It was a process, and I was part of it, whether I understood why or not. Later that afternoon, I checked my mailbox out of habit more than anything else. Bills, flyers, nothing important, until I saw it. A plain envelope, no return address, no markings, just my name, handwritten. Something about it made my chest tighten before I even opened it. I pulled the paper out slowly. One line. That was it. Ask about your birth. I read it again. And then again. The words didn't change, but the weight of them did. A quiet unease settled into my stomach. Something colder than fear. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't vague. This was specific. And it connected too easily to everything I had started to notice. The dates. The inconsistencies. The feeling that something had always been off. I turned the envelope over, studying it more carefully this time. The handwriting felt familiar. Not enough to place, but enough to unsettle me. I carried it back inside and laid everything out on the table. The will, the note, the birth certificate, side by side, like pieces of something I hadn't fully seen yet. I stared at them for a long time, long enough for the pattern to start forming. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about inheritance. It was about something they had been protecting, something they didn't want questioned, something that had been buried so deep. It had shaped my entire life without me ever knowing. My phone rang again. Daniel. I answered immediately. There's something else, he said, his voice more serious than before. What? The will hasn't been filed yet. Not publicly. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means this is being handled privately. Controlled. A pause. They don't want anyone outside of that room seeing it yet. My eyes drifted back to the documents on the table, to the note, to the words that now felt heavier than anything else. Ask about your birth. Daniel, I said slowly. What happens if something in that room isn't what it's supposed to be? Another pause. Then it becomes a problem, he said. For who? This time, he didn't hesitate. For everyone. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, the silence around me pressing in. Then I looked back down at the note, at the one question I had never thought to ask before. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that house hoping to be accepted. I was walking in ready to find out what they had been hiding from me all along. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because every time I closed my eyes, something new didn't make sense. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I was already at the kitchen table. Everything spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I could no longer ignore. The will invitation, the anonymous note, my birth certificate, and the quiet, persistent feeling that none of this had ever been random. I stared down at the certificate again, tracing the dates with my eyes. I had looked at this document before, dozens of times, probably, but I had never really seen it. Not like this. There was a gap, small, almost invisible, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I reached for my phone and searched for the hospital listed on the form. If there were answers, they would start there. The line rang twice before someone picked up. Records department. My name is Vanessa Cole, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm trying to request a copy of my birth records. The full file. There was a pause on the other end. Not long. Just long enough. Older records can sometimes be incomplete, the woman replied carefully. We've had issues with archived files. Incomplete. The word didn't sit right. What does that mean? I asked. It means there may be missing pages, she said. It happens. I leaned back slightly, my eyes narrowing. Has anyone else requested my file recently? Another pause. This one longer? I'm not authorized to. Just tell me if it's been accessed. Silence. Then, quieter this time. Yes. My grip tightened around the phone. When? Recently. That was all she would say. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for a few seconds, letting it settle. Someone else had already been looking into this, which meant whatever was missing wasn't an accident. I reached for the anonymous note again, turning it over slowly. Ask about your birth. The paper felt heavier now. Too clean. Too deliberate. Not something scribbled in a rush. Something chosen. And then it hit me. The texture. The weight. I had felt paper like this before. Legal stationery. Not random. Not anonymous in the way it wanted to seem. Whoever sent this knew exactly what they were doing. I pushed back from the table and stood, my thoughts moving faster now. If the answers weren't in the present, then they were somewhere in the past. The storage unit wasn't far. I had kept it for years. More out of habit than necessity. A place for things I didn't want to deal with but couldn't bring myself to throw away. Boxes stacked neatly. Labels fading. Memories. Frozen. I found the one I was looking for almost immediately. Mom. I pulled it down carefully, setting it on the ground and opening it slower than I needed to. Inside was everything I had left untouched. Old photos. Letters. Documents I hadn't read in years. I sifted through them quietly, my hand steady even as something deeper inside me began to shift. And then I saw it. An envelope. Sealed. My name written on the front in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a child. For Vanessa, when you're ready. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't remember this. Did I ever see it before? Or had it always been waiting? My fingers hovered over the edge before finally breaking the seal. Inside was a letter. The paper was older, softer at the edges, but the writing was still clear. My mother's, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the truth." I stopped there, just for a second, then kept reading. The words weren't direct. Not fully. But they didn't need to be. She talked about choices. About mistakes that weren't really mistakes. About people who would do anything to keep their version of the story alive. And then one line stood out, sharper than the rest. He was never meant to raise you. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening in a way that wasn't panic. It was recognition. Because I already knew what she meant. I just hadn't wanted to say it out loud. I reached deeper into the envelope and felt something else. A photograph. I pulled it out carefully. My mother stood in the center. Younger than I remembered. Her expression softer. And beside her, a man I had never seen before. They weren't standing apart. They were close. Familiar. The background caught my attention next. A building. Old. Industrial. But I recognized it. The original coal industries site. Before it became what it is now. My eyes moved back to the man. To his face. Trying to place something that didn't belong in any memory I had. I turned the photo over. There was a name written on the back. Faded. But still there. I said it under my breath without realizing. And the moment I did, everything shifted. Because I had heard that name before. Not in my home. Not in my childhood. But in passing, in whispers. In the parts of the company's history no one ever talked about. I sat back slowly, the photo still in my hand. My thoughts racing ahead of me. If this man was who I thought he was, then everything I had been told about that company, about my family, was incomplete. Or worse, a lie. I thought about Ethan. About the way he talked about our father building everything from nothing. About how proud he always sounded. And for the first time, it didn't feel true. I drove back home in silence. The letter and photograph sitting on the passenger seat beside me. By the time I got inside, the decision had already been made. I laid everything out again. The note, the letter, the photo, the records, each piece pointing in the same direction. There was only one way to confirm it. I opened my laptop and searched for a DNA testing service. My finger hovered over the trackpad for just a second. This was it. Once I knew, I couldn't unknow it. Once I opened that door, there was no going back. I clicked confirm. The order went through, and just like that, the question became real. Not a feeling, not a suspicion, a fact waiting to be revealed. That night, long after the city had gone quiet, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Hello. Silence. Then a voice. Low. Controlled. You're digging into things that were meant to stay buried. My grip tightened slightly. I didn't respond. You should stop. The voice continued. While you still can. I felt something shift inside me again. Not fear. Not anymore. Who is this? I asked. But the line was already dead. I lowered the phone slowly, the silence returning just as quickly as it had been broken. For a moment, I stood there, the weight of everything pressing in, and then I looked back at the table, at the truth I had already started to uncover, at the pieces that no longer fit the story I had been told my entire life. Tomorrow. They thought they were going to finalize their legacy. They thought everything was already decided. I let out a slow breath, my eyes steady now. They had no idea. I was about to tear it apart. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted to see everything before they could control what I saw. The law firm sat in the middle of downtown Chicago. All glass and steel. The kind of place that made power feel quiet instead of loud. Controlled. Intentional. I stepped inside, heels echoing softly against the polished floor, and walked straight to the front desk. Vanessa Cole, I said. The receptionist didn't ask for clarification. She already knew. Of course, she replied smoothly. They're expecting you. Of course they were. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then gestured toward the elevators. Top floor. Someone will meet you. I nodded and turned away, my reflection following me in the mirrored walls as the elevator doors slid closed. I watched myself for a second. Calm. Composed. Not the version of me they remembered. When the doors opened, a man in a dark suit was already waiting. This way, he said. No small talk. No introductions. Just direction. The conference room was at the end of a long hallway, the door already slightly open. I could hear voices inside. Familiar ones. I pushed the door open and stepped in. Everyone was already seated. Richard sat at the head of the table, exactly where he always positioned himself. Diane beside him, composed and unreadable. Ethan across from them, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room already. 2 lawyers sat near the center, and 1 empty chair. Mine. No one stood when I entered. No one greeted me. They just looked like they were measuring something. Vanessa, Diane said finally, her voice polite but distant. You made it. I said I would, I replied, walking to the chair and taking my seat. There was a folder placed neatly in front of me, my name printed clearly across the tab. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because something about the room felt wrong. Not tense. Not chaotic. Too controlled. Like everyone already knew how this was supposed to go. Except me. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and began, We'll proceed with the formal reading. His tone was steady. Rehearsed. Professional. He started with the smaller things. Charitable donations. Minor allocations. Details that filled space but didn't matter. I listened without really listening, my attention shifting instead to the people around me. Ethan didn't look at me once. Diane's eyes moved carefully between the lawyer and Richard. And my father? He didn't look at me either. That was new. Then the lawyer paused, just briefly. Before continuing, we now move to the primary distribution of assets. The room seemed to settle. Ethan straightened slightly. This was the part he had been waiting for. Majority ownership of Cole Industries, the lawyer read, is to be transferred to Ethan Cole, There it was. Clear. Clean. Expected. Ethan didn't react outwardly, but I saw it in the small shift of his posture. Confirmation. Validation. Like something that had always been his was finally being made official. My father gave a subtle nod. Diane allowed herself the smallest smile. And I felt nothing. Because this wasn't a surprise. This had been decided years ago. This includes all controlling interests, executive authority, and associated assets. The lawyer continued. A coronation. That's what it felt like. Not a decision. A ceremony. I waited. Not because I expected anything, but because I needed to see how far they were willing to go. The lawyer turned a page. His voice didn't change, but something about him did. Regarding Vanessa Cole, there it was. A brief pause. Too brief for anyone else to notice. But I did. No provisions are allocated under this will. The words landed flat. Cold. Legal. Final. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just empty. Then my father spoke. She was never meant to be part of this. The same words. Different room. Different audience. Same intent. I felt it again, that familiar tightening in my chest. But this time, it didn't stay, because something else had taken its place. Awareness. I shifted slightly in my seat, my gaze moving back to the lawyer. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the papers. Avoiding. Rushing. He flipped to the next page faster than necessary, like he wanted to move past this part. My fingers brushed lightly against the folder in front of me. I still hadn't opened it, because now I was sure. This wasn't everything. This concludes the primary. I have a question. My voice cut through the room before he could finish. Everything stopped. The lawyer looked up. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. Ethan exhaled, already irritated. My father didn't move. Why was I asked to be here? I said calmly. If I have no place in this will? The lawyer adjusted his posture. It's standard procedure. No, I interrupted. Still calm. It's not. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. Diane shifted slightly, her gaze moving to him in a way that didn't need words. A warning. He straightened. That is all that needs to be discussed at this time. Which meant there was more. My phone vibrated softly against my leg. I didn't react immediately. Then I reached down, just enough to glance at the screen. Unknown number. One message. Check the second file. My pulse didn't spike. It slowed, because now I knew. I lifted my gaze slowly, scanning the room. No one was looking at me, but something had changed. I saw it then, on the side table, a second stack of documents, separate from the ones being read, untouched, unmentioned, hidden in plain sight. I leaned back slightly, letting my hand rest on the folder in front of me. But I didn't open it. Not here. Not now. Because whatever was in that second file, that was the real story. The lawyer began wrapping up, his voice moving quickly now. Too quickly. Like he wanted this to end. Like he wanted me out of the room before I asked the wrong question. And I almost smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one being controlled. When the meeting ended, chairs shifted quietly as people stood. Ethan avoided me. Diane watched me carefully. My father still didn't look at me. I stood last, closed the folder, and walked toward the door without saying another word. No one stopped me. Of course they didn't. But as I stepped into the hallway, one of the lawyers moved slightly closer, his voice low. You should speak to someone, he said quickly, before you sign anything. Then he stepped back, like he hadn't said anything at all. I walked out of the building and into the open air, the city noise rushing back in around me. My phone was still in my hand. The message still there. Check the second file. I looked up at the glass building behind me, my reflection faint in its surface. They thought they had already written my ending. They thought this was the part where I walked away. But they made one mistake. They assumed I was still the person they raised. I wasn't. And I hadn't even read the real story yet. The message was gone before I reached the corner. I stopped walking, staring down at my phone like I could force it to reappear. Checked the second file, and then nothing. No number. No trace. Just an empty screen like it had never existed. For a second, I felt it, that flicker of uncertainty. The part of me that wanted to question everything. But it didn't last. Because I had already seen enough. I turned and kept walking. Daniel picked up on the first ring. "There's another file," I said, skipping everything else. "They didn't show it." A pause. Then his voice sharpened. "Then that's the one that matters." "I saw it," I added. "They kept it separate. Like it wasn't part of the reading." "Come to my office," he said immediately. Now, no hesitation. No caution. Just urgency. By the time I got there, he already had files open across his desk. His laptop glowing with documents I didn't recognize. "This doesn't look right," he said without looking up as I walked in. "It wasn't," I replied, closing the door behind me. They rushed through everything. Avoided eye contact. Like they were hiding something. "They were," he said simply. I stepped closer, setting my folder on the desk. "What did you find?" He turned the screen slightly toward me. "There's a filing connected to the estate that wasn't disclosed during the reading." My eyes narrowed. "Can they do that?" "They can try," he said. "But they can't hide it completely." He clicked through a few more screens, then paused. "This is restricted," he muttered. "Different name. Different classification. Different how." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Not under Richard Cole." Something inside me shifted. "Then who's—" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the file. The loading bar moved slower than it should have. Like even the system knew this wasn't supposed to be seen. I stood there, my arms crossed, my focus locked on the screen. "This is it," I said quietly. Whatever they didn't want me to know. The file opened. The first thing I saw was the heading. Genetic verification documentation. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't race. Because I already knew. Daniel scrolled slowly, line by line, until the result came into view. Richard Cole. Not a biological match. The room went still. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just quiet. I let out a slow breath, my gaze fixed on the words. "So he wasn't lying," I said. Daniel looked at me. "About what?" "That I didn't belong to him." He didn't respond. Because we both knew that wasn't the full truth. I leaned slightly closer to the screen. "When was this done?" He checked the date. "Years ago." Of course it was. They had known all along. I straightened slowly, my thoughts moving faster now. "This isn't new," I said. "They've had this—" Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Which meant everything that followed. Every decision, every rejection, every word had been intentional. "Keep scrolling," I said. He did. And that's when everything changed. Another name appeared, listed under biological parent. At first, it didn't fully register. Then it did. Because I had seen it before. On the back of the photograph. My stomach tightened. Not from shock, but from recognition. "That name?" Daniel said quietly. "Do you know it?" "Yes." I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I saw it last night. He turned toward me now, his expression shifting. "That's not just a name," he said. "I know. That's the original founder of Cole Industries." The words settled into the space between us. Heavy. Final. I shook my head slowly, almost to myself. "No," I said under my breath. "That's not what they said." "They wouldn't," Daniel replied, "because according to official records, Richard built that company." I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it finally made sense. "They didn't just lie about me," I said. I looked back at the screen. "They rewrote everything." Daniel scrolled further, his brow tightening. "There's more." I leaned in again. Legal notes, archived references, fragments of something that had been buried over time. Original ownership disputed. Transfer of control under review. Documentation incomplete. And then one line. Clear, unavoidable. Potential claimant, unresolved. I felt it then. Not anger. Not even satisfaction. Power. Because for the first time, the story wasn't something I was trying to understand. It was something I could change. They didn't call me there to give me anything, I said slowly. Daniel looked at me. No. They called me there because I'm a problem. Yes. I nodded once. Everything clicking into place. If this becomes public, the entire structure collapses. He finished. I leaned back, crossing my arms again. They wanted me present to make it official, I said. To lock it in before I could question it. That's what it looks like. I looked down at the document again, at the truth they had spent my entire life hiding. And suddenly, my father's voice echoed in my head again. You were a mistake. I almost smiled. Not because it hurt. Because now I understood. He didn't hate me because I didn't belong, I said quietly. Daniel didn't interrupt. I met his eyes. He hated me because I did. Silence followed. Then he leaned forward slightly. You have options, he said. You can challenge the will. Open an investigation. Force disclosure. I didn't hesitate. I will. He held my gaze. Vanessa, once you do this, there's no going back. They will fight you. I nodded. I'm counting on it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to survive them. I was ready to expose them. I gathered the document slowly. My movements calm. Deliberate. The DNA results. The name. The proof. All of it. I paused for just a second, looking down at the page one last time. They spent my entire life trying to erase me, I said. Then I closed the folder. They never realized. I looked up, my voice steady now. I'm the one thing that can destroy everything they built. And this time, I wasn't walking away. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask permission. I drove straight back to the house like it was mine. Because for the first time, it might have been. The gates opened slower than I remembered. Or maybe I was just noticing everything now. The distance. The silence. The way the place felt less like a home and more like a stage built to protect a story. I parked in the same spot as before. No hesitation this time. When I reached the front door, it opened before I could knock. The same staff member stood there. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. You came back, she whispered. I held her gaze for a second. I'm not leaving this time. She stepped aside without another word. Inside, the house felt different. Quieter. Not calm, controlled. I could hear voices from the main living room before I even reached it. My name. That was all it took. I stepped into the room without announcing myself. The conversation stopped instantly. Richard stood near the window, his back half turned. Diane sat on the couch, posture perfect but tense. Ethan was pacing, frustration written all over him. All three of them looked at me at the same time. No one spoke first. You weren't invited, my father said finally. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it now. Something I had never heard before. Uncertainty. I walked further into the room. Slow. Deliberate. I don't need an invitation anymore. Ethan let out a sharp breath. What is this? He snapped. You already made a scene. I didn't even look at him. Instead, I set the folder down on the table between us. The sound was soft, but it carried, you might want to read that. I said. No one moved at first. Then Ethan stepped forward, grabbing the folder before my father could. He flipped it open quickly, his eyes scanning the first page. And then, he stopped. The shift was immediate. His posture stiffened. His expression changed. Confusion first, then something else. What is this? He asked, his voice lower now. Keep reading, I said. Diane stood slowly, moving closer. Richard didn't move at all. That was the part that mattered. Ethan flipped to the next page. His jaw tightened. This doesn't mean anything, he said quickly. Tests can be wrong. There's more. I cut in. I reached into the folder and pulled out the second document. The name, the one that changed everything. I placed it on the table, closer to Richard this time. You should recognize that, I said quietly. Diane leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she read. Ethan looked between the pages, his breathing uneven now. This is ridiculous, he said. You're trying to... Am I asked, finally looking at him. He didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. I turned my attention back to my father. You're not even going to pretend, I asked. He said nothing, just watched me, waiting, like he always had. But this time, I wasn't the one being tested. Richard Cole is not my biological father, I said clearly. The words settled into the room like something irreversible. No one here is surprised by that, I added. That landed. Because it was true. I stepped closer to the table. My real father, I continued, tapping lightly against the second document, is the original founder of this company. Silence. Heavy now. Real... Ethan shook his head. No, he said. That's not possible. Dad built this. Did he... I asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph, sliding it across the table. Diane picked it up this time. Her expression changed. Not anger. Not denial. Recognition. Where did you get this? She asked quietly. It was never hidden well enough, I replied. Ethan looked at her. Mom. She didn't answer. That was enough. That doesn't change anything, she said finally, her voice tightening. Legally. Actually, another voice said from the doorway. It changes quite a lot. We all turned. Daniel stepped inside calmly, closing the door behind him. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Who is this? Ethan demanded. My attorney, I said. Daniel stepped forward, placing a second set of documents on the table. Everything she's presented is verifiable, he said, and legally significant. Diane straightened. You have no authority to be here. I have every authority if this concerns a disputed inheritance and potential fraud, he replied evenly. That word lingered. Fraud. Ethan looked between all of us now, his confidence slipping. This is insane, he said. Dad, say something. All eyes turned to Richard. Finally. The center of everything. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the documents, at the photograph, at the truth sitting in front of him. And then, slowly, he exhaled. I did what I had to do, he said. That was it. No denial. No explanation. Just justification. Something inside me settled completely. Because I had been waiting for that. Not an apology. Not regret. The truth. You knew, I said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Diane turned to him, her expression shifting. You told me. I told you what was necessary. He cut in sharply. Even she hadn't known everything. That was new. That was interesting. But it didn't matter anymore. I stepped back slightly, creating space between us. I'm not here to argue, I said. I looked at each of them, one by one. I'm here to make sure this doesn't stay buried. Daniel nodded once. We'll be moving forward with a formal challenge, he added, and opening a full review of company ownership. Ethan stared at him. You can't just take everything. I'm not taking anything, I said. That stopped him. Because it was the truth. I wasn't here to claim what they had. I was here to expose how they got it. You spent my entire life trying to convince me I didn't belong, I said, my voice steady. I looked directly at my father. You were right. A pause. I don't belong to your lie. For the first time, he looked shaken. Just for a second. But it was enough. I closed the folder. The sound final. Then I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one followed. Behind me, the silence felt different now. Not controlled. Not contained. Broken. As I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, clearer, and for the first time, I wasn't the one being pushed out. They were the ones losing everything. The next morning felt quieter than it should have. Not peaceful, just still, like something had already shifted, and the world hadn't caught up to it yet. I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hands, the steam rising slowly, the city outside moving like nothing had changed. But everything had. My phone lit up on the counter. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. Emails I hadn't opened yet. I didn't rush to check any of them. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Daniel's name finally appeared on the screen. I answered. "It's already spreading," he said. His voice wasn't surprised, just confirming what we both knew would happen. "How bad?" I asked. "Contained," he replied. "For now, but not for long." I leaned against the counter, staring out the window. "They're trying to keep it quiet." "Yes. Internal reviews. Private conversations. But people are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind they can't answer without telling the truth." That made me almost smile. "Almost. Board members are getting nervous," he continued. "There's already talk about reviewing ownership records. If that happens publicly, it unravels." I finished. "Yes." Silence settled between us for a moment. Then he added, "More carefully this time. You should also know people are reaching out. Former employees. People who worked there in the early years." My grip tightened slightly around the cup. "They have information," he said. "Things that were never documented properly." Of course they did. Truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. "Send it to me," I said. "I will." After the call ended, I set the phone down and took a slow breath. This was the part no one talks about. Not the confrontation. Not the moment everything explodes. But what comes after? The unraveling. The quiet collapse. I didn't see Ethan. But I heard about him. His authority inside the company was already being questioned. Meetings canceled. Decisions delayed. The certainty he carried like armor starting to crack. Diane was trying to manage it. Of course she was. Statements. Conversations. Control. But even she couldn't rewrite everything. And Richard. I didn't need updates to understand what was happening there. A man like him doesn't lose control gracefully. He fractures. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not the way I thought I might. No triumph. No celebration. Just a strange, steady recognition. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. Later that afternoon, I met Daniel again. His office looked the same, but everything felt different now. He didn't waste time. "You have a strong claim," he said, sliding a set of documents across the desk. Stronger than I expected. I glanced down at them but didn't reach out. "You could pursue full ownership rights," he continued. "If the evidence holds, and it looks like it will, you could take control of everything." Everything. The word sat there for a moment. Heavy. Real. "This could all be yours," he said. I looked at him then. Really looked. Because I knew what he meant. Not just the company. The power. The position. The legacy. Everything I had been denied. Everything they had built on a lie. Now within reach. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window. The city stretched out below. Steady. Indifferent. I thought about the house. The table. The words. "You were a mistake." I thought about every moment I had spent trying to prove that wrong. Trying to earn something I was never meant to have. And then I saw it clearly. For what it really was. A story that was never mine. "I'm not taking it," I said. Daniel didn't speak right away. "You're sure?" I turned back to him. "Yes." "Vanessa," he said carefully. "This is more than money." "I know." "It's power. Control. You could—" "I know," I repeated. And I did. That was the problem. I walked back to the desk, resting my hands lightly against the surface. "If I take it," I said, I tie myself to everything they did to get it. He watched me closely. And I don't need that, I added. The words felt lighter as I said them. Not like I was giving something up. Like I was choosing something better. I don't need their name, I said, or their company, or their version of the truth. Daniel nodded slowly. Then what do you want? I thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. I want it exposed. Nothing more. Nothing less. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not exactly. Freedom. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go of something that was never yours to carry. That night, I sat alone again. The same table. The same quiet. But it felt different now. Lighter. I picked up the DNA results one last time. Looked at the name. At the truth that had changed everything. And then I set it down. Because it didn't define me anymore. Not the lie. Not even the truth. I was never the mistake, I said softly. The words didn't echo. They settled. I was the truth they couldn't control. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't follow what happened next in detail. I didn't need to. Investigations moved forward. Questions spread. Things began to shift in ways that couldn't be undone. And I let it happen without me. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and let the truth stand on its own. I stepped out onto the balcony, the city lights stretching out in front of me. Alive. Unbothered. Endless. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, like you were the problem in someone else's story, I want you to remember something. You are not the mistake. Sometimes, you're just the truth someone else is afraid to face. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever lived through something like this, I'd really like to hear your story too. Leave a comment. Share it. And if you want more stories like this about truth, family, and finding your way back to yourself, stay here with me. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is finally tell the story they never wanted us to tell.